Hi, everyone. I want to welcome our guest speaker tonight, Gavin McGregor Skinner, to our show. And Gavin's been on before, and I really enjoy when he's here as a speaker. And when we ask him questions, we get a lot of information back. Gavin is a talker. I think we can go that way. And it's a tremendous amount of info that he comes across with. So we've had a lot of very positive responses from our membership in the past when he's been on. So I want to bring Gavin in, have you say a quick hello. And Gavin, you are the Senior Director of GBAC, which is the division of ISSA. Can you at least tell us exactly what that is so we know going forward what we're doing here?
Yeah. Sure can, Lance. Hi, everyone. So the GBAC, the Global Biorisk Advisory Council, is a division of ISSA. We have an accreditation program, which is based on 20 elements. It's very comprehensive, very holistic in its approach in not just setting up a yes or no or a pass or fail type program. The program that we have out, which is called our GBAC Star program, for both facilities and also, anyone who works in the cleaning industry, is about professional improvement. So continuous professional improvement. So once we get a baseline, we work with facilities, we work with companies, we work with individuals on developing then a plan on how to improve over time that's realistic and doable.
My understanding is that's dealing with larger projects. I mean, I'm sure you do small ones too, but we're talking airports, hospitals, colleges, things like that.
Oh, we are, Lance. And what's fascinating for me, sort of as an infectious disease expert, I worked for the US government as an epidemiologist, which is like a disease detective, being able to do a very deep dive, understand how is an airport, a convention center, how is a hotel, for example, even a school, cleaned in a way that creates an environment that protects human health has been fascinating. And to really, what our GBAC Star program with the 20 elements does is that deep dive in understanding what are your protocols, procedures, what equipment are you using, how can we help you with to do it better, save money. I know time is our biggest risk factor when it comes to cleaning anything that's in the built environment. So being able to do a really thorough deep dive analysis and work with these organizations like these airports, convention centers, and hotels has been absolutely fascinating. I've learned so much.
I've talked with you before about this, and I think in one of our previous interviews, you had alluded to this also, that these larger facilities actually are almost like a living entity unto themselves. They have their own personalities, they have their own specific problems, where an airport may have a problem because of the type of flights they have compared to a hospital that is expanded over 8, 10, 12 city blocks. I mean, can you touch a little bit about some of the specific issues on a few of these?
Yes, Lance, the size of an airport, a convention center, even the size of the hotels that we work with, the size of the schools. When you map it out by square footage, it's enormous. But when you map it out by users of that built environment, so that's both the workers, the employees, as well as the people that come in and out of those buildings on a daily basis, we're looking at some really significant, big numbers, which leads to risk. And for me to sit down and work with an airport, a convention center, a hotel, or a school, and go, right, how many people come into your indoor space every day? And I get a number. How many people work in your indoor space every day? Okay, how many of those areas within that environment, that built environment, are maybe reservoirs or risk or hazards for infectious diseases, for germs to thrive and survive? And we map that out on a floor plan. And by looking at that, we're looking at some really big issues here when it comes to, okay, so we know everyone wants to come into an airport, a hotel, convention center, and go, oh, look, it smells clean, it looks clean, it's clean for appearance. But what we really want to do is change that paradigm, help these organizations to understand that they can clean for health, and they can then market what they're doing by what they do by their processes and their operations, that they're actually protecting human health. And that's protecting human health of any user, not just the employees, but also the users. Anyone that comes into that environment should feel safe and confident.
We make a distinction when we talk with our members, when we teach classes, that we don't fix people, we fix buildings. But I think the side effect of fixing the buildings is what helps fix people.
It does, Lance, and I think what we've seen, and I like the conversations that Normie's been having with many of their stakeholders, as well as with ISSA and with the GBAC team, is how do we create a workforce development program that will focus on cleaning for health as a sustainable part of the industry that we do every day. It's what we're responsible for. It's going to be what what we're going to be measured against is cleaning for health and ensuring that every cleaning professional, the challenge we have in the cleaning industry is that there are many people within the industry that have many different terms of what they do or how they do it. But let's create a big umbrella that if you work in the cleaning industry, you're an essential cleaning professional. And how do we work towards a workforce development program that provides the necessary, I suppose, knowledge, skills, and abilities so that everyone understands what the hazards are, they can identify risk, but then they understand what needs to be cleaned and disinfected. And then most importantly, Lance, how often they need to do that. And that's still the question that we get at ISSA, especially through the GBAC team from so many service providers as well as facilities. How often should I be doing it? And that's something we really want to correct as we move into 2023. Get those training programs out there, get that education material out there that focuses on how often, and more importantly, again, it goes back to, what you're doing, is it best for the environment, and is it the best that you're focusing on, sort of science, evidence-based procedures for cleaning for health, and can you tell that cleaning story? And that's so important. We want everyone by the end of 2023 be able to tell their cleaning story and justify what they do and how they do it, and that's going to lead to more business opportunities.
I've heard you use the term built environments, and we've talked a little bit about that, and I'd like you to explain what you mean by that. But what's the next big thing coming up with some of these big programs and stuff you have under built environments?
Oh, I think it goes back. This is a great discussion. When we'll use certain terms, cleaning for health is one big term that we're all working on to ensure that it's appropriately defined. But within the built environment, Lance, this is anything that is not natural. It's any space that's actually been built by humans, by people, and we should be focusing on cleaning for health within trains, planes, cars. Any indoor space, anything that we occupy, because we know that so many studies have shown us that we spend about 90% of our day in the built environment. That's indoors, which is really interesting, Lance, because if you lived to 80 years old and you spent 90% of your time in the built environment or indoors, it really means you've spent 72 years of your 80 years of life inside. And we want to ensure that there's so much emphasis on health and safety. We want to ensure that everyone understands that there are places where you find germs in buildings, in other areas, and we call those reservoirs. But how do you identify those reservoirs? One thing that we heard from the COVID-19 pandemic was, frequently clean and disinfect those high-touch surfaces. But then when you went and asked people, what are those high-touch surfaces where you work? We got many different answers. We weren't consistent. So let's transition. Let's evolve. Let's move on and be better by focusing on those reservoirs within the built environment. And again, we know that's water and wet surfaces, dry surfaces, dirt and dust, any equipment that we use or touch, and especially air. And these are all the areas where germs can survive and lead to infection. And let's focus on those reservoirs and move that forward as being our main focus to come up with solutions that work, that are affordable as we clean for health.
As far as you said, 72 years, inside, living to 90 or 80. There was
80 years old, Lance.
80 years old, man, you just threw me with that. And then you think about the average person takes 20,000 breaths a day, times 365 days a year, times 72 years. That's a lot of indoor breathing. And indoor air quality, as the big umbrella, shows the importance there of how much exposure people really have in those environments. And cleaning with healthier products, cleaning the right way. I mean, how does a cleaning professional explain to their customer about what needs to be cleaned, where the things hide that need to be cleaned, and how to do them safely.
Oh, I think what you've just set up here for us, Lance, what you've just stated, the fact that we're talking about some significant time, 72 years out of 80 years that, we spend indoors. That's 90% of the day we're spending indoors. It's really important for any essential cleaning professional to understand that what are those other risks, other hazards out there. And again, let's look at some of these numbers. And I think it's important that we understand these numbers and we're able to convey those numbers within the workers that we work with, but also the stakeholders, the people, our customers. So let's think about this. A cough produces about approximately 3,000 droplets, and a sneeze releases about 40,000 droplets. But what does that mean? Well, we know that each droplet, that's one droplet, can contain as many as 200 million virus particles. So do the math there. 3,000 times 200 million, 40,000 times 200 million. You're talking about a lot of virus particles through one cough, one sneeze. Now, what we also know, Lance, is that those particles from a cough can travel up to 6 feet. Particles, these droplets from a sneeze can travel up to 26 feet. We know that breathing, and we saw this with COVID, the outbreak that happened down at Utah with the choir, the singing of the people, expelling droplets out of their mouth. We know that just breathing can expel droplets up to 3 feet. So people within the cleaning industry, we need to be able to define these risks, these hazards. But also we know a toilet flush. So if we flush a toilet, Lance, without closing the lid, the thousands of droplets that come out of the toilet can travel up to 8 feet away. Now, we can translate that to what does it mean for human health? How do we translate that to protecting human health? Well, a person can be infected with a viral disease. It might be COVID-19, it might be flu, it might be a rhinovirus, an adenovirus, it might be other viruses, but with as little as 1,000 virus particles. So with as little as 1,000 infectious virus particles can infect a person and make them sick. And so just look at what we do. So we've really got to be really together as a team here by understanding that cleaning surfaces, cleaning the air is one of our key defenses in the battle against infectious diseases, but also that includes, we've got to add on allergies, and we've also got to talk about exposure to harmful contaminants. So it's really important that that all of us understand the risk in these built environments, the risk where we work, the risk when we go outside our house, and be able to explain that in those sort of numbers so people go, that justifies why I'm paying you for what you do, but more importantly, why it takes you so long to clean for health that in a way that's, again, science-based and evidence-based, and it's effective.
So what would you say is the things that a cleaning professional would need to know to protect themselves and the public or their employees about germs? Basically, we'll call it germs, viruses, bacteria, mold, whatever, microbial contaminants in a environment.
I think first of all, we need to understand there's reservoirs, and these reservoirs are places on or in our bodies ourselves, or they're reservoirs where these are places in the built environment where germs can live and thrive. And for germs to spread, they have to spread between and among these reservoirs. So if we looked at the human body, there's 4 reservoirs. There's the skin, there's the gastrointestinal system or gut, there's the respiratory system, and then there's blood and fluids from our body. And I want everyone to understand that when we talk about blood and fluids, think about anything that's wet from a person's body can actually have germs in it. And we focus so much, Lance, on blood. I want people to understand that for blood from a healthy person, blood should not have germs in it. It shouldn't be infectious. It should be sterile. Blood has germs in it when you get blood from a person who has a disease or has some sort of infection. And so we look at blood as being different, but most of the time when blood comes from a person's body, it doesn't carry infectious diseases. So we've got to understand it's blood and fluid, so anything that's wet. Now, within the built environment, we're talking about these reservoirs. And we know that these reservoirs are environments where germs can, again, thrive and survive. Water and wet surfaces anywhere, dry surfaces, dirt and dust, equipment, and then again we need to do more focus on the air, which is what again a lot of the normie programs are addressing right now. So it's important we understand those reservoirs. Then we need to know the pathways, and there are really four main pathways that germs can spread. Touch, we know they can spread when we breathe them in. We know that germs can spread when we are exposed to splashes and sprays, but also through cuts and abrasions. So, you know, we have breaks in the skin here, Lance, that can bypass or break down the body's natural defense systems. And it's important that all cleaning professionals understand that there are reservoirs and then there are pathways. And so they should be, you know, everyone should be striving now to be trained on what those reservoirs are, what those pathways are, and then they should be able to explain they are trained. And so I want cleaning professionals to be able to explain, I'm a trained professional. I know there are reservoirs and pathways. I know I have tools and processes to address how to clean and disinfect those surfaces that I've judged to be high risk. And I understand that what I'm doing, I can also use tools to enable the scientific measurement of cleanliness. And one of the first steps we're doing right now, Lance, again, is bringing a team of master trainers, which you're involved in as well, together to try to develop under a sort of an umbrella of workforce development. What are those key critical core competencies, the skills, the attitudes, the abilities, the knowledge? What is it every person in the cleaning industry needs to understand to ensure that what we do is doing in the best way that we do it to protect human health?
Yeah, I want to talk to you about the workforce development in a minute. I just want to back up for a second to the previous discussion that we were just having. You know, you mentioned there's four reservoirs or four types of reservoirs, basically. But from my experience in the past, working for the government and doing a lot of other programs with emergency services, we're always taught about bloodborne pathogens. But that's where it stops, unless you get training in hazmat or something like that. You know, as an expert in the industry, what would you like to see next, you know, training wise, and for these people that are only taught about bloodborne pathogens?
Yeah, it's really important. The bloodborne pathogens served its purpose. When that training was required, we had HIV, we had hepatitis, and other diseases. We're still concerned about those pathogens today, those diseases today. But more importantly, I want people to focus on that anything that's wet from a person's body can actually have germs or infectious disease agents in them. And let's move away from, you know, everyone needs to understand, I've said before, Lance, blood is really sterile. Blood from a person that doesn't have a disease, doesn't have an infection, is not a threat in itself, unless it you know, it comes from someone who is infected. But the problem is we don't know that. We don't have that information when we go to clean up a spill, for example, on a floor or on a door handle or on another object in a room that's covered in blood. We don't know where it came from. We don't know what the underlying conditions were of the person where that blood actually originated from. So it's really important. We still have to carry out all those precautions for blood because it's just an unknown. But more importantly, we need to expand our knowledge base, understand that we need to expand our training to understand that blood and fluids, that's anything that's wet from a person's body, is a real risk for spreading infectious disease agents or pathogens, and focus on that. And move away from, oh, it's not, it's a sneeze, it's a cough, it's urine, it's diarrhea, it's vomit. No, these are all, for me, as an infectious disease expert, are high risk. And we really should be training everyone in the cleaning industry to focus on those high risk fluids. And there's probably at least 11 of them that come from the body. And that's, you know, and again, move away from that conversation. I agree with you, Lance. Too much of what we're doing now is around that conversation of just blood, but let's go back to anything that's wet that comes out of the body.
You know, you mentioned in some prior discussions that we had about an incident where somebody had vomited on carpeting, and then as it dried, it was vacuumed up, which created a huge airborne contamination issue, and people were getting really sick from that. Again, now we're not dealing with bloodborne pathogens. Now we're dealing with aerosolized, you know, things from something that dried, trying to clean that up. And if you don't do it properly, I think that's where the lack of education is really becoming a big problem in this industry.
And it's more likely for any essential cleaning professional to be exposed to vomit, diarrhea, sweat, sneezes, coughs, other wet substances from the body than blood. You know, it's we don't deal with blood every day. What we deal with every day is all these other wet substances that come from bodies and land on surfaces. And the potential there is something that I think in a way we've minimalized the risk. We need to go back and do our proper hazard identification, then a risk assessment based on, here's a very overcrowded room. Is there anything that's wet that came out of a person's body? And if it did, where did it land? And what are the necessary, again, cleaning products, disinfectants, or even the equipment I need to use, including personal protective equipment, to ensure that what I do in the workplace is done safely. And in that mindset is there. It's there in a number of organizations I work with on a day-to-day basis. It's not, I wouldn't say it's everywhere, but I'd like to see by the end of 2023, at least, Lance, that way of identifying hazards, doing a risk assessment, and then understanding that they are the risks that we have to focus on. You know, even though when these surfaces appear clean, they still might have germs that are invisible, we can't detect, that we have to then clean for health in a way that's safe for the cleaning professional, but also safe and healthy for the environment as well. So we don't damage, we just don't want to damage stuff as well. That's the other area that we need to focus on.
You know, I recently was in the hospital, part of the volunteer work and stuff I still do. I get involved with that. But with all the education and information coming out now, it's like at least the younger doctors, I'm seeing this in more, are looking at the industry with a new set of eyes. They're learning, they're recognizing different problems. I actually watched a doctor in the emergency room go from patient to patient, but stop after each patient and spray a sanitizing agent on their stethoscope, wipe it down, and then go to the next patient. You never saw that years ago. They would just stethoscope patient to patient to patient.
We're seeing